Parish Swigger on being named School Board Member of the Year by the Nova Scotia School Boards Association and thank her for her exemplary service to education in the province of Nova Scotia. Madam Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All in favour say aye. Those opposed nay. The motion is carried. Orders of the day. Oral questions put by members to ministers will start at 2:34. Proceed until 4:04. I would now recognize the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Will the Premier appear in person before the proposed rate increase by Nova Scotia Power and oppose this increase?
Now recognize the Honourable Premier.
Madam Speaker, of course, the government has appropriate representatives who appear before the Utility and Review Board for the purposes of examining the rate filing and to ensure that they apply the appropriate expertise to that examination. We support, of course, the financially and fund the consumer advocate. This was something that came about, in fact, as a result of the work that we did in opposition. Madam Speaker, all the tools will be used to make sure that the rate filing is properly reviewed.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Madam Speaker, what Nova Scotians are looking for is the Premier to stand up to Nova Scotia Power. Madam Speaker, the venue for the Premier to do that would be the URB, to show up and let everyone know that he would be opposed to the rate increases of 2013, 2014 and 2015. I can't understand why the Premier would not be opposed to the rate increases. So will the Premier tell all members of this House whether or not he supports the rate increases that Nova Scotia Power is looking for, or is he going to stand with Nova Scotians?
The Honourable Premier.
Madam Speaker, we always stand with Nova Scotians. We did that when we delivered more than $100 million in savings to Nova Scotians last year through a rebate on their home energy. We did that when we provided more than $11 million worth of relief to people through the heating assistance rebate plan. We did that when we ensured there was more than $100 million in savings through conservation, through Efficiency Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. This is the government that stands up for Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, that $100 million figure is a real popular one. It's the one that a Mirror and Nova Scotia Power take out of the pockets of Nova Scotians with the blessing of this government each and every year. Investing hundreds of millions of dollars, Madam Speaker, somewhere else, not here in the people of Nova Scotia. What they're looking for from their government is a Premier to stand up and protect the interests of Nova Scotia ratepayers and not Nova Scotia Power shareholders, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, shortly after coming into power, it was this government and this Premier that added an NDP tax on every power bill across the province of Nova Scotia, Madam Speaker. We believe, Madam Speaker, it is the shareholders of Nova Scotia Power who should be paying that tax and not the ratepayers. Will the Premier of Nova Scotia, will the Premier do the right thing, as he said he would do before the last election, and force Nova Scotia Power shareholders to pay his NDP electricity tax?
The Honourable Premier.
Madam Speaker, as I've said many times before, there is no tax that we have put on this. In fact, we took the tax off. We took the HST off. So, Madam Speaker, why won't the Leader of the Opposition stand up and say that he would not put the HST back on electricity?
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is for the Premier. All Nova Scotians were shocked and angered when Nova Scotia Power planned to raise their power rates by 6% over 2 years. That is an increase that is beyond the ability of Nova Scotians to pay and will cost Nova Scotians further job losses. My question, Madam Speaker, is when did the Premier or anyone in his government, including staff, learn that Nova Scotia Power was planning such an increase?
The Honourable Premier.
Madam Speaker, what I can say is this. The government of Nova Scotia was left with a utility that was privatized. It was privatized by the Conservatives. And when they did that, I want to remind Nova Scotians that a former president of the Conservative Party was made the president of Nova Scotia Power. He was examined at the time before Public Accounts. And I want to read just a short passage about the privatization efforts that the Conservatives made at the time. He was asked, Madam Speaker, if they had done a study to show the benefits of privatization to people in Nova Scotia. And this is what he said. A private sector company does things on an economic basis. It also has a mandate in a sense that we have to have a good corporate system. But no, I did not engage, and I did not do, and I am not going to either, engage in a major study on how we are going to be more effective. It is just a philosophy, just an approach to things that I believe and that I think works.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Madam Speaker, the only thing that needs to be privatized today is question period, because then maybe we'll get a truthful answer to a simple question like, when did you know that the power rates were going to go up? Yeah. That would be very helpful, Madam Speaker. And so I will ask the Premier. Nova Scotians are faced with a 2-year increase in their power rates, 6% over 2 years. Awfully convenient. It's the first time they've asked for a 2-year increase. Did the Premier or anyone in his government or anyone on his staff talk to Nova Scotia Power about providing a 2-year increase, which conveniently puts the next time after the next election?
The Honourable Premier.
Madam Speaker, the reason why we have a privatized utility is because the members of the Conservative Party decided that on the basis of a philosophy. They didn't need any studies. They didn't need to talk to anybody about it. They didn't need to see whether or not the people of Nova Scotia would benefit. If there is one thing that the leader of the Conservative Party can do the next time he stands up, it is to apologize to the people of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party. On his final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, the problem is not. Madam Speaker, the problem is not the separation of the power company from the government 20 years ago. The problem is the cozy relationship, the fact that that Premier is in bed with Nova Scotia Power today. That is the problem with our power rates. And to point back 20 years or more shows how cozy that relationship today is. That is the problem that Nova Scotians have today. They're so close, Madam Speaker, now we know they're even commuting to work together on the corporate jet. That is what is offensive to Nova Scotians. That is what they deserve an apology for, not something that happened in the 1990s. Madam Speaker, my final question for the Premier, my last hope in this round that we might get a straightforward answer about something that can be done today about the rising cost of power is, will the Premier finally stand up for Nova Scotians and tell his cozy commuting friends no to this power increase?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Madam Speaker, I heard the Leader of the Opposition last night saying I was too cozy with big business. Now, apparently, the Leader of the Conservative Party believes I'm too cozy with big business, which I have to say is a refreshing change since the last 3 weeks they were saying I was too cozy with unions. So, Mr. Speaker, what I can tell the people of Nova Scotia is simply this, that we would not abuse their trust the way that those parties have done in the past, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Conservative Party was the Chief of Staff to the Premier when they decided to do a tax cut and send $155 checks out to all Nova Scotians, an episode we haven't forgotten, and neither have they.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Nova Scotia Power keeps coming back to the people of this province, and they said no signs of slowing down. What the people want is a Premier and a government to stand up for them and to stand up to Nova Scotia Power. but the Premier would rather defend Nova Scotia Power than stand up against them. The company has a return on an equity, Madam Speaker, that is unacceptable. So my question to the Premier, will the Premier come to the hearing in September and demand that the rate of return be reduced?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know that the Leader of the Opposition would like to prey on people's ignorance, but he knows and I know that they don't have a fixed rate of return. If they make 1%, they get 1%. It's not fixed in the manner in which he says. So, Mr. Speaker, what I will say is this. We here control what it is that we can do with respect to power rates, and what we did was we took every single cent of Nova Scotia tax off of electricity, something that they oppose and something they would reverse if they had the opportunity.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Madam Speaker, not only would we not reverse the HST cut on electricity bill, Madam Speaker, not only would we not reverse the HST cut, we would take off the NDP electricity tax and put it squarely on the backs of the shareholders, Madam Speaker. So now that it's been clear,
Order, please. Order. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition has the floor.
Speaker, now that it's Madam Speaker, now that it's clear, the only tax on electricity bills that the province of Nova Scotia can control is the NDP electricity tax. When is the Premier going to stand up and take his own tax off power bills and put it back where it belongs on the shareholders of Nova Scotia Power?
The Honourable Premier.
Madam Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition deals with what he thinks is a tax. It's, of course, a demand-side management plan that returned $100 million worth of benefits to the people of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, it helps return $124 million to the pockets of shareholders of Emera is what it does, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Premier wants to stand up for Nova Scotia, and it's time he takes his NDP electricity tax off for every power bill that he has added to, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, force Nova Scotia Power shareholders to pay for his bad decision. So will the Premier do the right thing and force Nova Scotia Power to pay his tax instead of asking Nova Scotians to do it?
The Honourable Premier.
Madam Speaker, there is, of course, no tax on electricity, and the reason why there is no tax on electricity is because the members of this caucus voted to take it off, and members of that caucus voted to keep it on.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his next question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today, government revealed its much-anticipated mental health and addiction strategy. 2 years in the making, today's unveiling told us nothing new that wasn't already known and should have been implemented 2 years ago. While the strategy identifies the importance of early intervention, Madam Speaker, there's no question early intervention is important. There is no mention made as to how government will address gaps to support geriatric mental health programs, no mention support for university students, no mention for any programs to support women in domestic violence situations, and the impact this has on their overall mental health. So my question to the Premier, can the Premier please explain why the strategy failed to address these gaps?
Recognize the Honourable Premier.
Madam Speaker, the fact of the matter is the mental health strategy was released this morning. Not only was it released, it received a wide praise from mental health professionals right across the spectrum, but I will refer the question to the Minister for Health for a fuller explanation to the Leader of the Opposition.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. I'm so pleased to be able to stand here and talk about the $5.2 million in investment we're making to improve the mental health system in Nova Scotia. This strategy has 33 actions, Madam Speaker, and it will result in a better response for people who are dealing with mental health and addiction services from one end of this province to the other. And I want to thank all of the many, many people who are involved in developing this mental health strategy. Their work is very much appreciated, and it will not, their hard efforts have not gone unnoticed by this government.
Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Madam Speaker, as we all know, a strategy is not worth the paper it is written on unless resources are in place to fully implement it. While the Premier and this government brought forward a budget that ensured the administration of the Department of Health and Wellness grew by 3.8%, the funding committed to mental health and addictions-based funding grew by 3%. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, they found $300 million for Irving. They found $50 million for Bowater, Madam Speaker, but they found $5.2 million for mental health. So my question to the Premier, why is funding of mental health and addictions not a priority for your government?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The simple fact of the matter is that we have cut the costs of administration in health significantly. When we came to power, the costs of the administrative costs associated with the healthcare system ran not only higher than the national average, but among the highest in the country. It is now below the national average. The money committed to the mental health strategy is the single largest commitment to mental health in our province's history.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, regardless if the Premier would read his own budget, he would see an increase in administration, Department of Health and Wellness, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there's not a professional in the mental health system, there's not a family desperately waiting for mental health assessments, and there's not a family physician in this province who doesn't get frustrated with the wait times associated with assessment. The key, however, is to ensuring that the programs are available to treat the diagnosis after the diagnosis has been made. My final question to the Premier is, why does the strategy focus only on assessment wait times while failing to address the very necessary treatment wait times?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, in fact, I'm not sure whether or not the Leader of the Opposition actually read the strategy, but what it does, in fact, is do exactly that. It in fact, looks to ensure that people get the kinds of services that they need. There has been a program in place in this province for some time called the Strongest Families Program, which helps parents dealing with children who have difficulties. It was run under the IWK. In the last little while, just within the Halifax area. When the Nunn Commission report came down, the Cape Breton District Health Authority went to the Strongest Family Program and said, this is the kind of help that we need. They put money into the program. That was expanded into Cape Breton. And now, due to the work of the Minister of Health, the Department of Health, that program will now deliver that service throughout the province of Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is to the Premier. There are 50 collective agreements up this year in our health sector, Madam Speaker, starting with 6,500 nurses who begin collective bargaining in just a few weeks. The President of the Nova Scotia Nurses Union has already said, and I quote, that we're likely headed for a strike, and I will table that quote for the benefit of the House. My question to the Premier is, will he bring a plan to this House before the end of this session to keep important health services open and available for patients who need them in the event of an impasse in future contract negotiations?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank to the member opposite for the question. And I would remind the House that this is the party that introduced legislation that would create chaos in the healthcare bargaining sector. And I want to, that was just now, that was in this session that they introduced legislation which would essentially create chaos. And I want to share with the members opposite, this is an editorial from the Chronicle Herald on September 14, 2007, and this is what it says. But the evidence shows that in jurisdictions where binding arbitration is mandatory or where healthcare workers are subject to essential services legislation, frustrations eventually mount and illegal strikes become more frequent and nasty. Patient safety is in far greater jeopardy then.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Conservative Party on his first supplementary.
Madam Speaker, Capital Health has an essential services plan, and yet they still had 500 cancelled surgeries and over 2,000 important medical procedures that were postponed. That is Capital Health. In other health authorities, such as the Cape Breton Regional Health Authority, there is no such protection for patients in the event of a work stoppage. And I will quote recently from the retired CEO of Capital Health, just retired, Mr. John Malcolm, who says, and I quote, "Capital Health has a provision in the agreement with the NSGEU to provide essential services. Cape Breton Health Authority has no such provision." And I will table that for the benefit of the House. Right now, Madam Speaker, in 2012, the Premier has a choice to make. Will he protect patients and taxpayers or not? So I will ask the Premier, why is he willing to let thousands of Nova Scotians go without important medical services over the dollars and cents of a contract negotiation?
The Honourable Premier.
Oh, I suppose we could do what the Conservatives did, and they just opened the checkbook and wrote the check and didn't care about the future of the province or what it was that we were going to have to, or what the burden that other governments were going to have to shoulder when they came into government. But we don't operate that way, Mr. Speaker. In fact, what we are doing is we are engaging in a collective bargaining process. We're treating them, the excellent nurses, healthcare workers we have, fairly. So that is the best way to protect patient safety.
One job and of course the same thing.
The Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Premier's history lessons about actions taken in the past are very interesting because there's such a sharp contrast to the do-nothing approach, to the stand-by-and-let-it-happen approach that he takes when it comes to interruptions, whether they're strikes or lockouts or otherwise, in our important health services, Madam Speaker. The most recent example, Local 42 at Capital Health, ended in arbitration, and yet still there were 500 surgeries cancelled and over 2,000 important medical procedures postponed. The Premier could have resolved that one through some form of arbitration then, and he didn't. He let it go right to the end, and we still ended up with an arbitration where Nova Scotia will find out later how much they have to pay. The only ones that got locked out were the patients who needed important surgeries at that time, and the taxpayers, of course, who are eventually going to have to foot the bill. So my question to the Premier, why has the Premier abandoned the patients and the taxpayers that he was elected to look after?
The Honourable Premier.
Madam Speaker, that is exactly what we're doing. We're looking after the safety of patients. We're protecting the interests of taxpayers. We're not going to do what the leader of the Conservative Party would do, which is implement mandatory, and let me stress that, mandatory arbitration that would lead to health care chaos, that would only bring in illegal strikes, that would cause massive disruption in our system. That, Mr. Speaker, would be a mistake. Madam Speaker, my apologies.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, less than 2 months ago, the Minister of Health and Wellness defended IWK's so-called realignment of mental health services as the right thing to do, and I will table that article. Fast forward 2 months later, and here are the facts. We have 12 children and youth currently in the program for an occupancy rate of 100%, 17 waiting for admission to the program, 6 waiting for pre-admission, and 6 who recently received assessments who have also been added to that wait list for a grand total of 29. This is in addition to the 8 to 12 children and youth per month calling to access the program. My question to the Minister of Health and Wellness, given it has only been 2 short months and wait lists continue to grow, was cutting back on the IWK Act program still the right thing to do?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know that members of that caucus are very disappointed that this government has decided to invest $5.2 million into a mental health strategy that will improve mental health services across the system. I'm disappointed that they can find nothing positive to say about the hard work that went into developing the mental health strategy, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we have examined best practices, or Madam Speaker, best practices for mental health and addiction services around the world. And the priorities that we've identified, early intervention and services such as the service that the IWK is providing, are services that will make a significant difference in the lives of children and adolescents in this province. And I am very proud of the work that has been done and the work that we will continue to do to unroll the strategy and see it have the impact that we desire.
The honourable member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I don't think we're dismissive at all of the advisory committee and the work they did. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the wait time litany doesn't end there. The IWK Act program is no longer doing any more pre-admissions due to the fact that those coming into the program now will have to wait until fall or winter of 2013 before they will be able to start treatment. Madam Speaker, the mental health and addiction strategy, now less than 6 hours old, speaks to early interventions for both assessments and treatment. So when children are being assessed and sent to the program, they wait. You have done nothing, Minister, but move these children from one wait list to another. Madam Speaker, for the Minister to endorse this and play an active role in the underfunding that caused these changes, she should indeed be ashamed. My question to the Minister, how does waiting at least a year and a half for treatment, for treatment benefit children and youth who so badly need it now?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the strategy announced today will see every child 18 months of age screened, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, to pick up any delays and any problems and do early identification. It will see clinicians added into the Schools Plus system across this province, Madam Speaker. It will add additional services throughout the province for addictions programs where they are sorely needed, Madam Speaker. It will see the support line for families that has been so effective in Cape Breton and in Metro Halifax extended to the entire province, Madam Speaker. What this strategy does is divert people from the hospital system and provides the community-based services in communities where they should have been provided 20 years ago, 15 years ago, when that party was in power and they cut the guts out of the mental health system in Nova Scotia.
Please. I would ask the Honourable Minister to retract the use of the word guts. It's unparliamentary.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, when they cut the heart and soul out of the mental health system.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
This minister knows that across Nova Scotia, except for Capital Health, we do not have the resources to deliver community-based programs. That's the simple reality. And coming out of a mental health background, the minister should have started 3 years ago. Madam Speaker, I feel like it's Groundhog Day around here. If this minister was in opposition, she would be screaming from the rooftops about the injustice. Yet now, when access is being denied, she becomes a chief apologist for a DHA who had no choice but to fund the minister's desire for faster assessments by cutting back on treatment. The minister can ignore the facts. She can continue to deny much-needed treatment to children and youth. All I ask is that she does so having the best possible evidence at her disposal. We've asked for it. She has not provided that. Will the minister commit to meeting with the IWK Act staff and find out for herself and from the families waiting to access the program and tell them that she still believes the IWK's mental health realignment was the right thing to do? Will she commit to meet, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we unveiled today Madam Speaker, we unveiled today a mental health strategy that will be implemented over 3 years. Its primary focus is on services for children and youth, and we will be doing an evaluation, and we will have a report card that will be available in terms of allowing transparency and accountability for how this plan is implemented. And certainly the IWK and their programs will be part of that process, and I have every confidence that with the additional resources that have been allocated, $5.2 million this year, the largest injection of funds into the mental health system within any time that I can remember, Madam Speaker, we will see significant improvements and change in the system.
Now recognize the honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Yesterday, when asked about his mile-high adventures with Emera executives...
Order, please. The use of Mile High in the legislature is unparliamentary. It did slip through yesterday, but it will not slip through again. I would ask that the member retract that, please.
Retract that. We'll call high-flying adventures with Emera. Executives in the corporate jet, the Premier said, quote, it was in fact the most convenient way to get there. And I'll table the Hansard on that one. Cushy seats, no waits with security, extra leg room, and knowing how Emera likes to throw a good party, there may have been some top-quality in-flight entertainment. Yes, that sounds like convenient for the Premier. Too bad the Premier isn't as interested in Nova Scotia's convenience. It would be convenient for Nova Scotia. I must have hit a nerve because I keep hearing from the member for Lunenburg West. Lunenburg, he wants me to ask him a question so much, he keeps asking it that way. It's the only time you hear from him then. Anyway, I'll continue along with my question. It would be convenient for Nova Scotians to have a Premier that was up front with them and didn't hold secret meetings and power company bosses in corporate jets. It would be convenient for Nova Scotians to have a Premier who was serious about lowering power rates. Again, the member for Lunenburg West won't even let me get to a question. My question through you, Madam Speaker. My question through you, Madam Speaker. Now that he's had his fun with friends, with benefits at Emera, and enjoyed the corporate perks, when will the Premier consider what's convenient for Nova Scotians and finally put their agenda ahead of Emera's?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as I pointed out earlier, it is this that was that government that privatized Nova Scotia Power, that set up the structure that we're left with. So. But I want to make another point, because I remember when the tar ponds announcement was made that the then Premier of Nova Scotia rented a private jet, flew to Sydney, and took members of both the opposition parties with him at the time, Mr. Speaker, because it was the most convenient thing to do at the time.
The honourable member for Argyle on his first supplementary.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. For weeks, we've asked the Premier to reveal the details surrounding his discussions with officials at Emera and Nova Scotia Power. But he remains silent. He simply wants us to trust him. Now, hopefully, the Premier is able to forgive Nova Scotians that laugh at the suggestion that he's looking out for their best interests, especially when he's jaunting around with power company executives, having a jolly good time discussing Emera's issues in their corporate jets. Madam Speaker, my question through you, doesn't the Premier agree that it would be more convenient for ratepayers to know the full extent of his discussions with Nova Scotia Power and Emera so they can decide whether or not the NDP Emera agenda is in their best interests?
The Honourable Premier.
Madam Speaker, when the Conservatives privatized Nova Scotia Power, they didn't bother to do any studies. They didn't do anything. They just said it was on the basis of a feeling, a philosophy, and part of it they said was because when people have shareholders that have to work a little harder. They have to be more efficient. They have to work harder to earn people's money, Madam Speaker. That's what they said at the time. The reality is that it is this government that took the HST off of home energy. It is us that have been standing up for the people of Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Argyle on his final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, something is wrong here. The Premier sees fit to jaunt around with power company executives having a great adventure on their corporate jet. But then the Nova Scotians who paid for the Premier's lavish travel ask a simple question. What did the Premier talk about with those executives? It's a simple question, but they didn't get an answer. They didn't even get an apology. Since the Premier sees nothing wrong with his actions, it's reasonable to believe that he will repeat them. Does the Premier really think that his personal convenience justifies reinforcing the notion that he and Emera are in cahoots to give big, shiny, expensive projects without telling Nova Scotians their true costs?
The Honourable Premier.
Madam Speaker, what I believe is that the Lower Churchill project is one of the most important economic and energy developments in the history of our province. And I can say this. I will table for the House Leader of the Conservative Party a quote from his leader. It says, "I am an opposition leader. This is one of the times when I actually..."
Order, please. The Honourable Premier has the floor.
Well, we'll table it again and we'll read it again because this is what it says. "I am an opposition leader. This is one of those times when I actually completely agree with the government, with what the government is doing, and I have said so in the legislature of Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker." So, do we agree with Emera on the Lower Churchill project? Yes, we do. Yes, we do, because that's going to be better for all Nova Scotians. It's going to give us stable, long-term energy rates. And that's the great thing about actually being independent. You can praise a company when they do the good thing, and you can criticize them when they do the wrong thing.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Mr. Speaker, rapidly growing wait times are not the only challenge facing the IWK Act program. While it wasn't damaging enough for the program to see the loss of valuable team members when youth mental health workers were fired, access to a psychiatrist for the ACT program has also been recently reduced. The full-time ACT program psychiatrist has been reduced to 0.5 position, and to make matters worse, this same psychiatrist is filling a 0.5 position in the Young Tower program while holding down a full-time position at 4 South. Mr. Speaker, access is being denied. The quality of the service being offered to children and youth is being altered. How can the minister sit idly by while the IWK Act program is being dismantled right before her eyes?
Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, the IWK has adopted a new model in terms of the services they're providing to adolescents and families. It's a model called Choice and Partnership Approach, or CAPA. It includes a first short visit shortly after referral, and it ensures that young people will get into treatment sooner and matched up with the appropriate clinician with the right expertise to best meet their needs. And as I have explained many times in this House, the system that was there that the members of the Liberal Party like to defend was a system that was broken, was a system that saw considerably more than 29 people on a wait list. It was a system that saw in excess of 700 or 800 people on a wait list, Madam Speaker. And that is what we are fixing, and there is a great deal of public support to fix that system, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, the minister knows that there weren't 700 or 800 for the ACT program. Mr. Speaker, the minister has spoken in the past of the importance of family reintegration, and I agree, it is important. However, Mr. Speaker, the ACT program, as it previously existed, did just that. When a patient was admitted, Parents were invited on the unit to interact with their children on weekend 1. Weekend 2, they were given a day pass. Weekend 3, they were given a weekend pass to go home, and so on. Now, in order to save money and pay for faster assessments, staff shut down the program Friday at 3 and tells everyone to go home. My question to the minister, will she table evidence before the end of today which shows that sending children back to communities without necessary supports on a weekly basis is a more beneficial treatment plan than reintegrating children with families using appropriate assessments?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the IWK certainly does appropriate assessments for all of the patients they see, Madam Speaker. And the new model that they have adopted is a model that will assure that there are timely assessments, timely treatment with the right clinicians, better care sooner for families and children. And this is the approach that we in this government support, because the system that the Liberal Party are interested in defending and supporting is a system that was broken, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, every weekend since changes were made, one of the patients in the ACT program ends up on 4 South. There have been patients in the ACT program who ended up in emergency rooms, just like I said to the minister as what would happen. And Mr. Speaker, and she should really speak to the IWK ACT program staff, the most tragic statistic of all. Children are returning to the program on Monday morning who have regressed to the point where program staff, who I met with, spend 2 days getting patients to the same condition they were when they were released the previous Friday. Halted progress equates into longer stays. Longer stays mean increased wait times for others waiting to assess the program. My final question to the minister, given the extra cost pressures associated with emergency room visits, stays on 4 South, coupled with the huge disruption to treatment, does the minister still believe closing the ACT program for the weekend was the right thing to do?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And as I've indicated, the IWK have adopted a new model, one that will assure that people will not languish on wait lists for months and months and months without any contact, while a very small number of people receive services. This is the right thing to have done. And I fully support the new model of care that they have adopted, and we are already seeing very positive results from that model, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my question through you will be to the Minister of Energy. Madam Speaker, Nova Scotia Power has said that the average family will pay $3.50 more per month on their power bill next year alone, and an additional $3.50 a month the year after that. Now, Madam Speaker, $3.50 could buy a family a loaf of bread or perhaps a container of milk each month. The NDP said an awful lot in opposition, but as soon as they got into the government benches, quickly cozied up to the power company to drive through their expensive agenda. Madam Speaker, my question to the minister through you, since the minister is refusing to keep the House open to deal with the real issues facing families like rising cost of power rates, which does he suggest families pay for, Madam Speaker, groceries or the electricity bill?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't think I'm closing the House down, or I'm willing to stay here as long as the member opposite wants to stay. So, but $3.50 is the rate that's proposed. The UARB will determine whether $3.50 is just or not.
The Honourable Member for Hants West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The average family will pay $42 more next year for electricity. That's $42 less a family has to buy fuel for their car or school supplies for their children, Madam Speaker. Last year, Nova Scotia's disposable income dropped 1.8%. No wonder with the NDP's 2% tax grab, taking $4,000 from the average family in higher HST, Madam Speaker. My question to the minister, since the minister is refusing to keep the House open to deal with real issues facing families like the rising cost of electricity rates, which does he suggest families pay for? Their children's school supplies or their electricity bill?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, I'm willing to stay here as long as the honourable member wants to stay. Let's stay to debate these issues. But $3.50 a month or $42 a year, again, the UARB will determine. They'll call in the experts they need to determine this is fair and just. They'll call in interveners, like our government will be intervening. I hope your party will also be considering doing that. But in the end, we have a whole lot of initiatives to get off of coal that your party and previous governments have relied on very, very heavily.
The Honourable Member for Hants West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the real issues facing Nova Scotians is the stress on their pocketbooks and the bitter pill when they hear about double-digit increases in salaries for Nova Scotia Power executives. In 2 years, Nova Scotia Power will have taken an extra $126 from the average family from this rate hike. That's $126 less to pay for recreation for their children or medications for their family. Madam Speaker, since the minister is refusing to keep the House open to deal with real issues like the rising cost of power rates for families, which does he suggest they pay for, their medications or their electricity bills?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, through the UARB process, you, honourable member, will have a chance to intervene if you so wish on behalf of Nova Scotians. Certainly this government will be intervening on behalf of the ratepayers of this province, and I know the UARB will have the opportunity to look at all costs, whether it's salaries or wages or fuel or all the determinants of a rate application. So I would hope the honourable member would consider also being an intervener at that process.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Madam Speaker, for 7 weeks now, this government has attempted to justify its actions in the Talbot House case. And quite frankly, every response has come up short. The actions by government, the disrespect this government has shown to both staff and the board of Talbot House would certainly not have been tolerated by the government when they were in opposition. In several responses, the minister has indicated the program did not meet the standards of compliance as set out in 2008. So my question to the Minister of Community Services, so if standards are such a concern to the minister, why was there no direct discussion between her department and the board of Talbot House on standards and standards compliance prior to December 2011?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Madam Speaker, it's obvious with the situation with Talbot House was the fact that we discovered them a short period before the time that we took action immediately to sit down and talk to the board of directors, and that's when we discovered that they weren't following the standards.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove on her first supplementary.
Madam Speaker, it was the department's job to be watching over Talbot House. That's why one would assume they brought in the standards of care. Madam Speaker, Sean McSween is a professional pharmacist. He recently published online his experience with Talbot House, and I'll table a copy of that. Mr. McSween spoke to the strengths of the program and how the executive director provided him with the necessary support to cope, to deal with his addiction, and to heal. He was rescued by the program, and Madam Speaker, he's not alone. Sean McSween is one of hundreds of people who have told us that without the Talbot House program, they would be lost. They told us, Madam Speaker, the Talbot House program works. Could the minister please table before the end of question period today the evidence they gathered which specifically shows that the Talbot House program was not a successful program?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Let me clarify, Madam Speaker, several things. We have never said that there was not some people that felt that they received good services at Talbot House. What we did do is, as I've said over and over, an organizational review. I don't have to table anything because all they have to do is read the organizational review, and the review identified areas that the standards were not being met. It is our responsibility to those people receiving the services. They would be the first one yelling and screaming if they had people coming to them that were upset with the services that were being provided to them. So it is our responsibility responsibility to make sure the services are being provided in the manner to meet the standards, plus that the tax dollars, as the funder, we are the funder, that we are responsible to how those dollars are being used. And I'm sure Nova Scotians certainly appreciate a government that makes sure their tax dollars are being used in a wise manner. Thank you.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on a new question.
Madam Speaker, the online petition started by Archie Stewart of Port Hawkesbury has now passed 26,000 signatures and continues to grow hourly. A little more than a week ago, this petition had only a few hundred names. The people of this province are outraged at the proposed power rate increases for 2013, 14 and 15, and the petition is making that very clear. My question for the Premier is, what is the Premier doing to fight these proposed increases?
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Madam Speaker, as has been pointed out numerous times in the House, the government will indeed be at the Utility and Review Board for the purposes of examining the rate filing. And people of Nova Scotia should know that the structure of the company was one that was decided by the Liberals when they were last in power. They set out the relationship between Emera and Nova Scotia Power. The rules that exist around these things were essentially put in place either by the Conservatives or by the Liberals when they were in government, and of course Nova Scotians today live with those decisions.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on her first supplementary.
Madam Speaker, the message is clear. Nova Scotians cannot afford another rate increase from Nova Scotia Power, period. They want a premier who will do something about this, Madam Speaker. But according to correspondence between our office and Mr. Stewart, the Premier hasn't bothered to reply to messages from this group. I'd like to table, actually, that one, Madam Speaker. I won't read from it. Madam Speaker, why can't the Premier take time out of his schedule to respond?
Just let me, I want to be clear about the process on that one. Let me confer with the clerk for a minute, please. Okay, thank you. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Madam Speaker, my point is that more than 25,000 people have signed that petition and the Premier has not responded to it. Every member of the Liberal caucus has affixed their name to the petition, and my question to the Premier is, will the Premier affix his name to the online petition today?
The honourable Premier.
Madam Speaker, well, I in fact haven't seen the petition. I don't really know anything about it at all. But I can say this, that if there are 25,000 people who have signed up online, there are 25,000 people who have lower power rates today as a result of the province removing every cent of provincial tax from their bills.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on her final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, it's becoming a little tiresome to hear about the benefit of the HST when we know that the electricity tax is larger than the HST amount, $10 million larger, and that was offloaded from the Energy Department. The cost of running Conserve Nova Scotia was downloaded to the ratepayers of Nova Scotia. That's a fact. And it should not be the ratepayers that are paying that. So, Madam Speaker, that answer simply gets tired. I would like to ask the Premier if he will personally attend the rate hearings. We've heard him say government will be there. Will he personally attend the rate hearings in September and oppose the rate increases as the petition is asking?
The honourable Premier.
Madam Speaker, what you know, and of course what the member will never say, is that she and the members of her caucus voted against taking the HST off of home electricity. And if the desires of the Liberal caucus were true today, the power in Nova Scotia would be 8% higher today than it is.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Energy. You know, Madam Speaker, sorry. Madam Speaker, in a number of questions today, we've learned that the Premier is refusing to appear in person at the Utility and Review Board hearings this fall. The fact is there's a difference between being represented and actually participating to defend Nova Scotians. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Minister of Energy personally appear at the rate hearing this September?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And, you know, certainly the UARB process is an interesting opportunity, and I will be conferring certainly with my department staff and to see who it is from government, from the Department of Energy, will be attending. At this point, I can't say for sure just who it would be.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Minister and the Premier, Madam Speaker, the Premier and even the members of the government benches have done that all day today. So, Madam Speaker, we certainly apologize on behalf of everybody in the House for that error. Madam Speaker, the fact is we know that department officials have attended all of those hearings and they sit there and don't say anything. And we know that because we've been there and the Leader of the official opposition has been there to ask questions. I've been there to ask questions at all of them, and not just the general rate hearings, but the recent ones. But the Minister's Department sits there silently and monitors it. There's a big difference between that and actually participating. So, Mr. Speaker, if the Minister isn't going to attend personally, Madam Speaker, if the Minister is not going to attend personally, if the Premier is not going to attend personally, will he direct his officials to oppose the Nova Scotia Power rate hike request?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We will be there certainly to scrutinize the application. We'll be going over it thoroughly before the September hearing, and we will be an intervener in the process and to ensure that Nova Scotians receive the fairest possible rates here in Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, you would think that after, Madam Speaker, I know, it's in the back of your head. It's in the back of your head. Without even thinking. Madam Speaker, you know, the fact is the Minister and the Premier have been asked this many, many times. You would think by now they would know if they plan to attend. They can have their department officials go there, monitor the hearings, stay silent like they've done at past hearings, or they can take the Conservative Party's approach and participate in secret backroom negotiations for a rate increase and then put out a press release calling a 10% rate hike a win, quote, a win for Nova Scotians. Or, yeah, absolutely. The Premier can use that in responses in question period tomorrow. But, Mr. Speaker, what Nova Scotians want is for this minister to go down to the hearings, stand up, and say enough is enough. The rate hikes have to end. Will he do that?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Certainly we'll be there to represent the best interests of Nova Scotians, and the 3% proposed rate will be thoroughly scrutinized by government and again at the hearing application. But just for information, Madam Speaker, the government of British Columbia, I believe that's a Liberal government, is proposing applications there of a rate increase of 8% this year, 3.9% next year, and 3.9% the year after. Compare that to what's being asked here in Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Businesses are dealing with significant cost pressures. Especially concerning to all businesses are high power rates. The Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism doesn't seem to think so. On May 8th, the Minister said that there, quote, may be some companies that consider power rates to be a factor, end quote, and I'll table that quote. In fact, Madam Speaker, he went on to argue, quote, I will reiterate that the cost of power may be an issue for some businesses, end quote. I'll also table that quote. So my question to the Minister, will the Minister clarify his statements indicating that he feels power rates are not a serious concern for businesses in the province of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Economic, Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm proud to stand in my place and say the most important thing that businesses consider, whether they be here in Nova Scotia or whether they be a foreign company looking to move here in Nova Scotia or investigating the possibilities of being here in Nova Scotia, are the people, Madam Speaker. It's the people that attract companies to Nova Scotia because we are educated, We are resourceful. We are well trained and educated. We are hard-working individuals. And you know what, Madam Speaker, the other day, I will reiterate once again, and obviously the member needs some clarification. I will say again, is power rates a factor? Well, you know what? All of those things are a factor, the most important thing being human resources.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And what matters to businesses and what matters to the private sector is their profit. And revenue minus expenses is their profit. And a big portion of expenses are human resource costs and input costs like power, particularly in industries like manufacturing and export. When power rates continue to rise, businesses have to make decisions about what to cut back on. Not being able to reinvest on such things as staff, new product development, and other essential components make businesses less competitive. In fact, the Minister talks a lot about our manufacturing and export sectors. But since March 2011, Nova Scotia manufacturing shipments, or exports, were down 11.1%. Since January of 2012, Nova Scotia is the only province to see negative growth in manufacturing shipments in the entire country, Madam Speaker. And I will table that information for the House. My question to the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism. With such a dramatic effect on all sectors, including manufacturing and our exports, will the Minister admit that power rates are affecting our province's ability to grow our economy?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Economic, Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, anyone with some common sense and some sound reasoning would realize that in 2012 there were some drastic bumps in the province of Nova Scotia, one being the forestry industry. If anybody has been listening, we've had a crisis in the forestry industry, Madam Speaker. Do you know what? A fact that I will tell you about manufacturing is that in 2011, manufacturing increased by over 10% in the province of Nova Scotia, and we led all provinces and territories in this country.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, we had 0.3% growth in our GDP under this minister's watch last year, down from 1.6% the year before, neither of which is even close to the national averages in the performance of economics in these provinces. Yeah. So essentially what we have under this government, 20 years. If Waldorf and Stadler would listen to my question, they might get educated on how the economy works. Yeah. What we have here, Madam Speaker, we have an underperforming economy, plain and simple. If nothing else, this performance should be a wake-up call to this minister. Madam Speaker, this minister needs to understand that skyrocketing power rates harms and affects, has greatly negative impacts the economy. And this government continues to not take action to address these rates, which affect the economics of our province. Will the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism appear before the UARB at the coming Nova Scotia Power General Rate Application hearing to help protect our businesses and our economy against further power rate hikes by Nova Scotia Power?
The Honourable Minister of Economic, Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I heard through you, I heard the member talk about education, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I've stood in this House this whole session, and I tried to educate that member opposite. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker, I've even invited that member to come over to my office, Madam Speaker, and I will sit down, and I will have
Order. The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I made an offer to that member, Madam Speaker, and I make that same offer to everyone in this House, that we will educate any member of this House with respect to jobs here so that they can have an intimate understanding of the path that we are on, Madam Speaker. I will do that. I will commit to that. You know what? we will do that, and that's a standing offer. So anytime that member wants an education, if he's serious about an education, the door is open.
The Honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, today we learned of yet another family is suffering because of the inaction of this government. A young boy in Cape Breton with special needs was the victim of bullying and humiliation while waiting for his bus. The school board reportedly told the boy's mother they couldn't do anything because it was the jurisdiction of the bus stop. The issue of jurisdiction was addressed by the government's own task force, but was overlooked in legislation. Madam Speaker, my question to the Minister of Education is, why does the Minister have to say to the little boy in Cape Breton, and what immediate changes will she make to ensure that his and other children's safety at the bus stop?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I can't speak to any specifics on any specific situation, but I can say that this government is taking a very measured and comprehensive approach to making sure that we are able to meet the needs of the safety of our children. Inside school and outside school, we want to make sure that we speak with all of our stakeholders, our principals, on how we can actually monitor and engage in the activities before we put anything forward in legislation. The answer is not legislation. The answer is action, and we need to work through on how we are able to do that. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North on his first supplementary.
Madam Speaker, the mother in Scotia told reporters she is outraged that authorities aren't doing more to stop bullying. Experts and families are not impressed by the government's legislation. However, the government could address this today and call a Progressive Conservative caucus's piece of anti-bullying legislation, both of which would have provided tools to address this very situation. And Madam Speaker, we heard the Minister of Energy say he's willing to stay to debate valuable pieces of legislation. I hope that the Minister of Education and the Premier are willing to do that too. So my question to the Minister is, will she agree to enact better and more effective legislation before the House rises so more kids do not have to suffer over the spring, summer, fall and into the future?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. What I can say here today is that we are working on making sure that our children are safe within our system. We are hiring an anti-bullying coordinator to be able to look at the programs that are in schools, to be able to engage with the principals on how we can make our children safer. I will say that legislation that cannot be enforced is not worth the paper it is written on. We want action, and we need to do this in a measured, comprehensive manner. We need to make sure how we approach this properly so that our students are protected. So what I stand here today is we are working on that within the department. We are hiring an anti-bullying coordinator, and we're making sure that we are going to have action to protect our students. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton North on his final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, we're willing to sit down and enforce some of this, bring forth some of this legislation with the Minister. The incident in Cape Breton, like many others, show better legislation is needed now. There is legislation before this House that seeks to address bullying with a preventative and a restorative approach, and with some teeth if need be. But rather than properly keep children safe in the coming months, the government wants to go home. The government's refusal to work collaboratively with other parties in this House has made the anti-bullying feeble, and children deserve better. Will the Deputy Premier and House Leader agree to keep the House open so all parties can work together to pass effective legislation to keep our kids safe now?
The Honourable Premier. Deputy Premier.
Well, Madam Speaker, after the Conservative Party in power for 10 years, 10 torturous years, and doing nothing about bullying, nothing at all, sitting sessions of 15 and 17 days long, and asking us how long we're going to stay here. We're going to stay here till we get the work of the people done. Then we'll go, Madam Speaker. That's when we'll go, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Nova Scotia Power is currently planning to come before the UARB for more increases in power rates over the next 3 years. Repeatedly, government has been asked to intervene and stand up for Nova Scotians who are finding it more and more difficult to pay their power bills and put food on their table. These increases in power rates are also making it difficult for schools to absorb costs with no additional funding. So my question to the Minister of Education is, will the government make an adjustment to the funding to public education to cover the costs in increasing electricity within our schools?
The
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. We are making sure that the resources that we are providing school does meet the needs of the fixed costs that schools have. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Colchester North on her first supplementary.
Madam Speaker, power rates have increased in Nova Scotia 7 times in the last 11 years. That translates into close to 40% that Nova Scotians are asked to pay for their power. In the past, school boards received funding to cover their inflationary costs. Those costs included such things as furnace oil, diesel, fuel, gas, electricity, and other costs. What is different, Madam Speaker, is that school boards are now being asked to absorb all of those inflationary costs with no additional funding, and in fact, those are on top of the across-the-board reductions to schools. Programs are being cut, teaching positions are being lost, inflationary costs are rising. We know that these cuts are having a negative impact on our classrooms, so my question to the Minister is this. Will the Minister now show some leadership, identify education as a priority, and provide schools with the funding they need to protect the kids in our classrooms?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I am showing leadership. We have a plan to make sure that every child in this province has what they need to succeed. We are investing in our students. We are investing in many new programs that will allow our children to succeed. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester North on her final supplementary.
Well, Madam Speaker, in case the Minister hasn't heard, parents and teachers do not agree with that statement. Madam Speaker, declining enrollment has no impact on inflationary costs. Schools still must be heated, the lights must be on, and kids must be transported to school. This government has been asked to restore funding to education. This government has been asked to support programs for students with special needs. This government has been asked to identify education as a priority. And this government has been asked to protect Nova Scotians from power rate increases. And, Madam Speaker, this government has said no to every one of those requests. So my question to the Minister of Education, will the Minister now take some action? Will she restore funding to public schools? Will she allow boards to cover the increasing power costs? And will she protect our kids from her negative cuts?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to remind the member opposite that this year we had the lowest teacher-to-student ratio in a generation. Our class sizes remain small. We have increased our funding per student in the province. We are investing in our students. We are investing so that we will have students that have opportunities to succeed in the 21st century. Thank you.
The honourable member for Preston.
Madam Speaker, soon after taking office, this NDP government cut the amount assistance available to low-income Nova Scotians from $450 to $200 through the Heating Assistance Rebate Program. Madam Speaker, the minister at the time of the cut for Service Nova Scotia said the number of people to benefit from this program will increase from 54,000 approximately to 70,000. That's an increase of more than 15,000 households, and I'll table that document. Documents supplied by the department show that this increase never happened. In fact, the number of rebates that were given out by the government decreased by 4,000 people. That's a decrease of 4,000 households, Madam Speaker, and I'll table that document. Will the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations tell this House how many households he expects will access this program in this fiscal year?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm not sure the final numbers are in yet, but I think they're somewhere in the 54,000 household range.
The honourable member for Preston on his first supplementary.
Madam Speaker, in 2008-2009, the budget allotted for HARP was $29 million. Today, it's $14.9 million. In that time, oil prices have gone up, and so have electricity prices. Electricity prices have risen 20% in the past 3 years, Madam Speaker. The average price of furnace oil this year in Halifax was $1.16 per litre. In Sydney, it was $1.09 per litre. And in Yarmouth, it has been $1.22 a litre, and I'll table that document. All this time, wages in our province have remained at low levels of growth. People are simply not able to keep up with the cost of living under this government, especially those with really already low incomes. My question is to the Minister. How does slashing the rebate and freezing income thresholds help those who need the assistance to heat their homes?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I think the slashing he's referring to was from the previous administration, not this one. The issue, if he calculates the changes to including the HST rebate on home heating, also the HARP program, and the Good Neighbour Fund that we fund through the Salvation Army, I think he'll find that over a 2-year period that people actually will be getting considerably more money from this government than they did from the previous one.
The Honourable Member for Preston on his final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, I will remind that Minister that the Tories proposed it in the budget that was never passed. The NDP, when they brought their budget in, did slash the extra money in the program. Madam Speaker, in addition to slashing the rebate, the NDP was consistently underspent in their budget allocations between $3 and $4 million each year. This is between $3 and $4 million that does not reach low-income Nova Scotians who need it to help heat their homes. Madam Speaker, this program is directed at helping those who need it the most. And the NDP should be maximizing their budget funds, ensuring that Nova Scotians get the most support they possibly can from this fund. Madam Speaker, considering the heating needs of low-income Nova Scotians that have gone up, and the Minister has been leaving $3 to $4 million on the table each year, will the Minister consider adjusting the HARP program, such as increasing the rebate or adjusting the income thresholds?
The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The issue around both the heating assistance through HST, there used to be a criteria and a cap of how much energy used. So that was removed by this government, Madam Speaker. On the HARP program, the level, I think the limit of 10,000 kilowatts was reduced to 6,000 kilowatts, so more people could make use of the program, and actually we believe to be lower income individuals. And on the money that we give to the Salvation Army for the Good Neighbour Fund, although we don't actually control that program, but it used to be that individuals who use that program could only access it once every 5 years. Now they can access it once every 2 years. So the amount of dollars, because I heard one member say that they get $21 less. I think he's referring to $11. But in a 2-year period, they're up over $300. So they're actually getting more money under this government than they were under the previous administration, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove.
Madam Speaker, the infilling project at the Bedford waterfront has caused some concern among local residents. There's been a discovery of possible petroglyphs at the waterfront. My question is for the Minister responsible for Aboriginal Affairs. Can the Minister please update this House on whether any investigation has been completed into possible petroglyphs in part of the Bedford waterfront?
Recognize the Honourable Premier.
I would advise the member for Bedford that, in fact, there's an analysis process that takes place that the department looks at all the sites that are brought to their attention. Whether or not this particular one has been brought to their attention, I can't say, but I'd be happy to find out and provide her with the information.
The Honourable Member for Bedford Birch Cove on her first supplementary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And in fact, it has been brought to their attention. I will table 2 letters that were CC'd to me when this first came to light. Madam Speaker, a year and a half ago, the coordinator for special places from the former Department of Tourism, Culture and Heritage wrote to Waterfront Development Corporation strongly recommending an archaeological impact assessment be conducted, as the Premier can now see from that correspondence. Waterfront Development Corporation responded asking where the location, nature and value of the possible petroglyphs were. Can the Minister Community Cultures and Heritage please indicate what actions the department has taken since that time?
The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member across the way for that important question. No question, the goal and the mandate of the department is to ensure that any heritage or any significant areas in the province are protected, and we're more than willing to ensure that we do that. We've done it on several occasions in the last number of months. As the Premier said, we'll make sure that the member opposite has all the information that we have in the department or in the Department of Aboriginal Affairs to ensure that we protect any significant areas within our province.
For Bedford, Birch Cove on her final supplementary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This isn't the only issue of concern on the Bedford waterfront. At the final community consultation, residents outlined a number of concerns with the proposed plan. Now, when I raised these issues with waterfront development, they said they didn't have any more money to redraw the plans. So my question, can the minister responsible for the Waterfront Development Corporation please indicate whether community consultations will be taken into consideration in the final plans for the Bedford waterfront?
Recognize the Honourable Minister of Economic, Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. And trust me, I know that I will be having consultation with the Waterfront Development Corporation about this very issue, and I will report back to you in an appropriate period of time.
The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Justice. On April 18th, the province and the Capital District Health Authority announced that a joint review of the tragic circumstances surrounding the death of Raymond Tavel. A press release promised that a progress report on the review will be provided within 30 days. The review is due on or before this Friday. Will the Minister confirm that the progress report on the review will be presented before this House rises for the summer?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We will honour our commitment.
Recognize the Honourable Member for Inverness on his first supplementary.
Madam Speaker, Nova Scotians are interested in the procedures and policies of the East Coast Forensic Hospital because they can compromise public safety, as we had seen, and they do not give adequate public notification of a potential public safety risk. They are worried because it appears that the tragedy of April 17th was not an isolated incident, and we know that because another patient has failed to return to the hospital within weeks of the announcement of the review. At the time the review was announced, the Minister of Justice had said there's accountability that needs to be measured. And, Madam Speaker, I can table that news article. So the Minister had said that there's accountability that needs to be measured. We know that the best place for that to happen is right here in the People's House. My question to the Minister, will the Minister be accountable to the people of Nova Scotia and demonstrate a commitment to transparency and accountability by presenting the progress report before question period tomorrow?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to point out a significant difference between this government and the previous government. What we like to do is that we like to get the facts before we make broadcasts of what we're going to do and not going to do. We made a commitment. I answered the first question saying that we have till Friday and that we will honour and respect what we say. Our word is our word.
The Honourable Member for Inverness on his final supplementary.
Well, Madam Speaker, getting the facts straight, and I can think of all the myriad of promises this government has broken, claiming they didn't know things were the way they are since they've taken office. So what's important here today, though, Madam Speaker, is the present. There was a review promise. There's a very unfortunate incident has occurred, and we on this side of the House are asking for accountability. We're asking on behalf of Nova Scotians. The Minister's reluctance to make a minor adjustment to the time the review is released begs the question, is the government hiding something? Tomorrow is the last chance for the Minister to reassure Nova Scotians and do the right thing for the patients at the hospital who are also impacted when they are not returned by tabling the findings of the review one day early. My question to the Minister, and I will ask him one more time, will the Minister seize this chance to do the right thing and table the progress report tomorrow before the House rises?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
I will turn this phase of the question over to my colleague, the Minister of Health.
Now recognize Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And the answer to the honourable member's question is yes. There will be information tomorrow available before the House rises.
Now recognize the honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. Madam Speaker, for months now, the Wentworth Collingwood Road in Cumberland County has been in serious disrepair. And I will table some photos of the road and its terrible condition. And maybe the Minister wants to look at these photos, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the condition of this road poses a serious and safety concern for travellers and the people in the area. They want to hear from the NDP government and to see them take immediate action. So my first question to the Minister is, will the Minister commit to repairing the road in the near future?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
I want to thank the member for the question. Finally. I would like to point out to the member, not that my travel plans are of great significance. That is on one of my travel routes to a destination I'm headed for in the long weekend. I give the commitment to that community that I will see the road personally during my travels.
The honourable member for Clare on his first supplementary.
Madam Speaker, I certainly welcome the Minister's commitment. Madam Speaker, this portion of the road has become treacherous for commuters. There is clearly not adequate space to pull off to the shoulder. If a driver was forced to veer to one side to avoid an animal or oncoming vehicle, they would end up in the ravine. And of course, this is unacceptable. So again, to the Minister, is this road going to be repaired soon?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal.
Again, thank you to the member opposite for the question. This is an example of roads across our province that have been neglected for a long time. We have a plan in place to address these roads, and many of the opposition members have brought particular roads to my attention. Considering the particular case you brought to my attention today in the House, I can assure you that I guess I better make sure that my Jeep is in good repair before I travel it.
The Honourable Member for Clare on his final supplementary.
Madam Speaker, as the photos clearly show, the shoulder of this section of road has eroded completely to the pavement, leaving no space between the road and the steep embankment. A number of people use this road on a daily basis, and they would like a time commitment from the Minister when it's going to be repaired. So my final question to the Minister is, when can these people from this area expect the department to fix their road?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Again, I thank the member for the question, and it's of some concern that when we address specifics of this nature, I can't respond directly to the member here in the House with the specifics, but I'm sure that the good people who work for the Transportation Department in that particular area can tell more specifically. I want to assure the people of Wentworth Collingwood it's an important road. It's a road that, of course, carries children to and from school. It carries important economic uses in the community, and it will be addressed in a timely fashion. But thank you for the question. Much appreciated.
Now recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, yesterday when asked about Emira's decision to hold a swanky party on the Halifax waterfront for their executives, only a day after asking for yet another power rate increase, the Premier said, and I quote, "It was ill-advised and a very poor judgment on behalf of the company." Later we learned that very same company decided to fly the Premier to an announcement in St. John's on their corporate jet last November. All the while, the Premier is keeping Nova Scotians in the dark on what impact the Lower Churchill project will have on Nova Scotia's power bills. I guess he saves those decisions for the safe confines of Emira's corporate jet. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, my question through you for the Premier is this. Doesn't the Premier agree with his own Doesn't the Premier agree that his own decision to jaunt around with Emira and Nova Scotia Power executives on their corporate jet while Nova Scotians are left struggling to pay their power bills was ill-advised and showed very poor judgment?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, the member seeks to distort the truth. The truth is we paid the commercial rate for a trip.
Order. The terminology seeks to distort is unparliamentary, and I have to ask the member that the Premier retract that. Rephrase it.
The seeks to or the distort part? Okay, Madam Speaker, the member misrepresents the fact. The fact of the matter is that the full price of the flights were paid completely appropriately, as they would be. And of course, this is a very important project. This is about the Muskrat Falls project. It is about ensuring that Nova Scotia, Newfoundland and Labrador combine on one of the most important energy and economic development
I asked him to rephrase it.
Economic development projects in our history. You know, Madam Speaker, there's a little video on YouTube, and I'm going to just table a transcript, and it is the leader of the Conservative Party, and this is what he has to say about the Lower Churchill. He says, "I want you to imagine if we were able to take the hydropower of Newfoundland, the tidal and wind power of Nova Scotia, and the nuclear power and transmission access of New Brunswick, and they all work together, we would be a green powerhouse in North America. We could have cheaper, greener, sustainable energy at prices that attract industry, that are of benefit to you and your home and to your business as well." That is what the leader of the Conservative Party says about the project that we were engaged in signing.
While the Premier did restate his remarks, he did not retract that comment.
I retract the word, I guess it was distort, that you found. What's that? Is that right? I'll retract it, okay.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
There we go. Time is up. Thank you. Time allotted for oral question period has elapsed. Thank goodness. I now recognize the Honourable House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And we are certainly happy to waive our business to keep question period going if you so wish. But could you please call Resolution 997?
Call Resolution 997. I recognize the Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. See, during the debate, I'll get it right. It's the question period, get it wrong. But, Madam Speaker, the Resolution 997 is about power rates, and the operative clause is, therefore be it resolved, members of the House of Assembly strongly urge the Premier to start showing leadership and stand up to Nova Scotia Power instead of sitting idly by while power rates continue to skyrocket and life becomes less affordable for Nova Scotia families. And that was submitted by the member for Preston a number of days ago. I'm not sure which day exactly. Madam Speaker, I would hope that all members of the House of Assembly recognize that power rates are a significant issue in this province. They are affecting every family, they are affecting every business, and they ultimately affect the choices people have to make. The Premier would like to make a lot about decisions of other governments, and there's no question that certainly don't agree with the Tory decision many years ago to privatize Nova Scotia Power, but I haven't seen the NDP move to change that situation either. So it's as much a talking point as it is trying to do something about it and trying to solve the problem. If what he's proposing is to buy it back, then by all means he should stand up and say that, because that's where he seems to be going the past couple of days. Electricity, but the fact is, if you look at the entire last Liberal mandate, power rates didn't increase. In fact, there was only one. There was one right.